America's proudest war stories don't start with explosions. They start with ordinary people who chose to carry something heavier than fear. Because there are names etched into stone in towns you've never visited, and behind every one of those names is a family who kept going, a porch light that stayed on, and a promise that outlived the war itself. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find proof, not proof in a headline, not proof in a documentary reel, proof in paper, proof in ink, proof in a letter that was never meant for an audience, never meant for history, and never meant to survive long enough to be read by anyone else. They found it in an attic, sealed and untouched, dated 1944, and inside it was a line so clear, so steady, so unmistakably American in spirit, that the woman holding it felt her throat tighten before she even understood why. It wasn't a brag. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't a speech. It was a vow. A young American soldier far from home wrote a promise to the woman he loved that sounded like it could hold a whole country together. And when you hear it, you don't just learn what he did. You learn what we were willing to be. This is Stories of Honor, letters, memories, legacy. And this is the letter they found in the attic after 70 years. His name was Thomas Collins, and for most of his life, he was the kind of man you'd pass at the grocery store without noticing. He wasn't loud. He didn't tell stories over dinner to make everyone listen. He didn't collect praise. He lived the kind of life where responsibility is quiet and love is practical. The neighbors knew him as Mr. Collins, the guy who showed up early, kept his word, fixed what was broken, and went home without making a show of it. But before he was a grandfather, before he was the steady figure behind the lawnmower and the church handshake, he was just Tom, young, newly married, still learning what it meant to be a husband, still learning how a home becomes a promise. Tom and Mary built their life the way a lot of Americans did in those years, with routine, with patience, and with the belief that small, decent things mattered. Coffee in the morning, a radio in the kitchen, a light left on at night, a photo on the mantel, a supper table that didn't have much on it some evenings, but always had conversation and steadiness. Mary was the kind of woman who kept track of life without needing attention for it. She remembered birthdays, folded laundry like it was a craft, and carried her worries silently so the home could feel safe. Tom loved her for that steadiness, because it made him feel like the world could change and still leave one place untouched. Then the war came closer, not just as news on the radio, but as the kind of reality that pulled men away from their jobs, their porches, their families, and their plans. Tom didn't leave because he thought it would be easy. He left because he believed that when your country calls, you answer. That sense of duty wasn't a slogan to him. It wasn't politics. It was something older and simpler. An understanding that some generations are asked to carry what others won't have to carry later. He kissed Mary goodbye with the kind of calm that looks like confidence until you realize it's discipline. He promised her he would write. He promised her he would come back. He promised her he would not let the war take away the man she married. And Mary, standing there on the porch, promised she would keep the home alive until he returned. In his duffel, Tom carried more than clothes and personal items. He carried what every service member carries, even if they never say it out loud, an image of home that becomes a compass. He kept a small photo of Mary folded carefully and tucked where it wouldn't crease, not for romance, for survival. Because when you're far from home, you don't hold on to big ideas. You hold on to small, real things that keep you steady. You hold on to a face, a voice, a porch light, a routine, and you learn quickly that courage isn't a constant feeling. It's a decision you repeat day after day. even when your hands are tired. That first letter in the box was written in the early part of his service, before the weight of time could turn a man inward. The handwriting was neat, the lines straight, the tone careful, like he was speaking softly across the distance so he wouldn't wake the worry in her. It didn't read like propaganda. It didn't read like a movie. It read like a young American trying to protect his marriage from the one enemy he was sure about: the silence. "My dearest Mary," he wrote. And the moment those words appear, you can feel the room in your mind shift from history to intimacy. He told her he missed the small things first, which is something people only understand after they've been separated from what they love. He didn't say he missed adventure or excitement. He said he missed her footsteps in the kitchen, the sound of the radio, the comfort of a familiar light. He asked her to keep the porch light on for him, not because he needed it to see, but because he needed to picture it. He needed to know the world still contained something unchanged. He told her he couldn't say much and wouldn't pretend he wasn't tired, but he promised he was all right. And he wrote the line that 1,000 American families could recognize in their bones: "I'm doing what I said I'd do." He asked her to tell his mother he was eating, to tell her father he was keeping his head down and his heart up. And then he gave Mary the strongest sentence in the whole letter, without making it sound dramatic: "You are stronger than any distance." When his granddaughter read that decades later, she said it felt like the room got quieter, not because the words were sad, but because they were steady. There is a certain kind of American pride that doesn't come from swagger. It comes from restraint. It comes from a person writing in the middle of uncertainty, as if the best thing he can do is not add to the fear at home. That kind of strength never makes headlines, but it builds families and holds communities together when the world feels unstable. Tom's service wasn't a string of cinematic moments. It was mostly routine layered over tension. Wake up, fold the blanket the same way every day, check what needs doing, wait, move when told, wait again. The hardest part, for many men, isn't a single moment. It's the long stretch of time in between where your mind wants answers and you don't get them. In those stretches, you become an expert in small comforts: a warm drink, a clean pair of socks, a hymn someone hums under their breath, a joke that reminds you you're still human. Tom wasn't the loud one among his friends. He wasn't the one trying to impress anyone. He was the steady one, the one who noticed when someone didn't eat, the one who shared what he had without performing generosity, the one who wrote letters for the guy who couldn't find the words. And that, too, is part of what Americans should feel proud of, because it shows what service actually looks like when it's not being filmed. Ordinary men choosing decency when nobody is watching. The second letter in the box was shorter, and somehow it carried even more weight because of that. It read like a lesson he learned in the middle of service and wanted to hand to Mary like a tool. He told her he watched a man nearly lose himself over something small, not because the man was weak, but because the mind gets tired before the body admits it. Then he wrote the kind of advice that sounds simple until you realize it can save a life. Don't try to carry the whole world. Carry the day. He told her to make the bed, wash the dishes, write to him even if she thought she had nothing to say, because nothing is nothing when it reminds you who you are. He said he kept her photo where he could touch it without thinking, like a reminder that he belonged somewhere good. And then he wrote a line that feels like a husband's command against loneliness: keep the radio on while you cook. He wanted her surrounded by sound. He didn't want the house to feel too quiet. That's how you know these letters weren't about war as an event. They were about war as a force that tries to hollow out ordinary life. Tom was fighting that force with routine and tenderness. He wasn't asking Mary to be heroic in public. He was asking her to keep being herself in private. He was asking her to keep the home warm enough that when he came back, he could still recognize it. In the box, there was also a photo, black and white, ordinary at first glance and unforgettable once you understand it. Mary stood on the porch in a simple dress, one hand on the railing, as if she'd stepped outside for a breath of air. Behind her, the porch light. Even in daylight, you could see it there like a quiet witness. On the back of the photo, Tom had written one sentence, "So I remember what I'm coming back to." That line is the heart of patriotic pride when it's clean and honest. Service isn't abstract. It isn't a slogan. It's the willingness to protect something real, a home, a family, a future, a place where a light stays on because someone is waiting. If the story ended there, it would still be worthy. A box of letters, a photo, a love held steady across distance. But it didn't end there, because at the bottom of the box was one envelope that looked different from the rest. It was thicker, sealed, and dated 1944. There was no stamp, no postmark, no proof it ever traveled. It was simply addressed to Mary, as if he meant to place it in her hands himself. And when his granddaughter turned it over, she saw something else tucked inside. Another page, folded behind the first. 2 pages, sealed together. 2 moments held in one envelope. 2 versions of the same promise. When she opened it, she expected something like a goodbye. What she found was more complicated and more human. And in a strange way, it was even more honorable because it wasn't polished. It was the truth of a man trying to come home without pretending he hadn't been changed by what he carried. He started by admitting he had begun the letter 3 times, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he did. He wrote that people were saying the end was coming, and that it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a doorway you're afraid to walk through because you don't know who you'll be on the other side. Then he wrote a line every spouse of a veteran recognizes in their own language. If he was quieter when he came home, it wouldn't be because he had less love, but because he had more to hold inside. He told Mary he thought about the porch light, her hands, the kitchen table, and the radio like it was the only sound he would ever need again. But he also admitted there was a part of him that learned to listen too closely, to notice too much, and he didn't know how fast that part would soften. So he asked her for one thing, his one request. Be patient with the silence at first. Don't take it personally. Keep being you, and then he wrote the vow that makes Americans sit straighter when they hear it, because it contains the shape of duty and love in one breath. He promised he would come back to her, not just to the house, not just to the town, but to her. That letter was never mailed. There was no stamp, no postmark, no trail. Maybe he couldn't bring himself to send it. Maybe he didn't want to worry her. Maybe he planned to hand it to her in person, and never did. Or maybe he kept it because the promise needed to stay close to his own chest until it was fulfilled. Whatever the reason, it became a time capsule that explained something his family had wondered about for years. Why he was so quiet after he returned. Why he carried himself with such restraint. Why he seemed proud but not celebratory. Grateful but not loud. Homecoming is one of the most patriotic moments in American imagination, and it should be. But it isn't a movie scene. It's real life. It's learning how to sleep without listening for a world that no longer needs you to be on alert. It's sitting at the table and realizing you forgot how to talk about ordinary things. It's walking through the grocery store and feeling strangely overwhelmed by shelves full of choices. It's a family learning each other again. The bravest men aren't always the ones who can recite stories. Sometimes they're the ones who can rebuild a life quietly, without letting the weight spill onto the people they love. Mary didn't push him. She didn't demand performance. She didn't turn his silence into a fight. She did what she had done all along, the thing Tom begged her to do across the distance. She kept the home alive. Coffee in the morning, radio in the kitchen, porch light at night, and slowly the silence softened. Tom began fixing things again, which is how some men heal. A loose hinge, a porch board that creaked, a window that didn't close right, work that created order, work that said without words, "I am here. I am building again." And one evening, weeks after he returned, Mary found a note folded beside the kettle, so small you could miss it if you weren't paying attention. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a sentence, written the way a man like Tom would speak. "Thank you for keeping the light on." That note is the kind of thing that should make Americans proud for the right reasons, because it shows what service protects. It protects the chance to come back and live an ordinary life with dignity. It protects the chance for a family to stay intact. It protects the porch light, the kitchen radio, and the quiet promise between two people who refuse to let distance turn them into strangers. The pride isn't about violence. The pride is about the willingness to carry hardship so others can keep their routines, raise their kids, and live in peace. Years later, after Tom passed, Mary kept the box. She didn't talk about it much, not because she didn't care, but because some things are sacred, some things you protect from becoming casual conversation. She stored it the way you store something valuable that doesn't need applause. Before she passed, she wrapped the box in a quilt and wrote on the lid, "For Mary, always." Then she placed it in the attic, not to hide it forever, but to keep it safe until the right hands found it. Because legacy is not always a speech. Sometimes legacy is a quiet handoff to the next generation that says, "This family knows what duty looks like. This family knows what love looks like under pressure." When his granddaughter finished reading, she did not turn it into drama. She turned it into gratitude. She framed the photo. She preserved the letters properly. And that evening, she took her children out onto the porch as the sky darkened. She flipped on the light and left it there, glowing into the night, not because it was necessary, but because it meant something. It meant her children would grow up understanding that their comfort did not appear out of nowhere. It came from choices, from sacrifice, from discipline, from an American who wrote steady words when it would have been easier to fall apart. That is what stories of honor exist to do, not to glorify violence, not to chase shock, to preserve the human truth behind service, to show that honor can be quiet, that patriotism can be humble, that love can be disciplined, that a porch light can become a symbol of the nation's greatest strength. People who keep their promises. This is Stories of Honor, letters, memories, legacy. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. And if your family has a letter, a photo, or a memory tied to service, share it in the comments. Because the truth is simple. Letters fade, but legacy doesn't.